Greetings. My name is Nadia Ahmed, and I'm doing a presentation on British Special Operations funding from 1798 to 1815, looking specifically at the Duke of Wellington's battles from the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War to the Battle of Waterloo. And I wanted to go over some of his early battles, specifically focusing on the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War and how it laid the ground for the defeat of Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo. At the time of Arthur, when he was young, his mother had said about him, "I vow to God, I don't know what I shall do with my awkward son, Arthur. He is the food for powder and nothing more." She was very critical of him and did not see much ambition in him early on. At the time of his death, Queen Victoria had said of Arthur Wellesley that he is the greatest man this country has ever produced, and his assessment of the Queen was based largely because of the defeats that he had led to against Napoleon Bonaparte and Tipu Sultan. And this portraits here are currently in the care of the British Library. Tipu Sultan's defiance against the British was very well known, especially because he was prepared to fight to the end and not accept any humiliating terms for defeat or surrender, which many other ruling princes at the time had done so in India. And that would be his defining legacy. When Tipu Sultan was killed, he was defending the fort of Sringapatna against the British forces. His defeat marked the beginning of a 2-decade-long period in which the British overrode every power in peninsular and central India. Tipu Sultan had been a major adversary, and his demonization in the British accounts of the time later was of a correspondingly high order. Napoleon also led an expedition to Egypt earlier in the 1790s and had an obvious eye towards undermining the British in India, and Tipu would have played a key role in this, and also given his position on the East Coast. The British remained alive to any power in India linking up with the French, and so this continued until Napoleon's final defeat. This was very much of a concern that the British, that the Indians would tee up with the French. And so the danger of this possible alliance between Tipu and the French was very much on their minds in the late 1790s. And it may have been more imagined than real, but it was enough to make sure that the removal of Tipu Sultan did happen. And the British also at the time had engaged in specific sorts of alliances as well that they had conducted both quietly under the radar, and also done so very, very openly. And it's also important to see, it's interesting to see that this part of India that where Arthur Wellesley had been based earlier, as well as where his brothers were working as well, is based off of Fort St. George in Chennai, India. This is interesting because one of the key financial donors of Yale, Elihu Yale, had been in fact stationed there as the president of the British East India Company, and he had amassed a fortune of £200,000 while in India. And he returned to Britain in 1699, well before any of the incidents that are a note here. But what he did do is work to really preserve the status quo and to make sure that the British had achieved stability in the region. The Fourth Anglo-Mysore War was part of a specific campaign that was led to prevent the British excursions into India, and had been depicted so in this mural that shows Indian cavalry troops advancing for both sides on as they're seeking to corner the British army. This is part of an 18th century battle scene where the victorious commander sits on an elephant holding a red rose. It's also important to see that the British historians had seen this as a 30-foot long masterpiece, which was sold in an auction in London. It was considered to be an artistic triumph and a potent symbol of the Indian resistance to the British imperialism. It was also considered the greatest Indian picture of the defeat of colonialism that still survives. It was considered to be a unique and fascinating piece of artwork. This piece had been sold in London for the value of 630 pounds or $830,000. It was not clear who had actually received or provided the winning bid, and this auction had been reported by the BBC. Arthur Wellesley and his brother's presence in India had led to the expansion of British presence in India, as you can see from this map here, how much the British territories had expanded during the time that the Wellesley brothers had been in India, through both serving as governors in the region and leading military excursions. During the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, we saw the British building off a number of different issues. Some of those issues, especially which are of interest to special operations issues, is that they sought to cut off enemies' alliances that would exist, and they also sought to cut off opposition's funding and build alliances on their own with that would set up a divide and conquer territory. They were also able to once they had to achieve the defeat of Tipu Sultan, able to go in and capture Mysorean rockets that he had developed, which also went on to be used against the Americans going forward. They also sought out to use this technology to develop other types of weapons and ammunition. The Americans were also able to use this specific types of technology when they had captured other British forces and use it against the British with better precision. You had also seen that they were able to use a larger force that attacked, and that was fresher. There was also the use of ground rockets. The military leaders had also sought out to provide booty to their soldiers. There was a specific instances of military intelligence that were used. We also seeing that the artifacts that were taken during the conquest were also delivered to England to really to bolster and hoist up the victory, to really keep it alive, and is to serve as a source of pride. Some of the other types of artifacts and discoveries that were made include diamonds, jewels, and weapons. There was also specific and strategic use of hostages that had impacted the war as well, leading up to it, including the taking of hostages of two of Tipu Sultan's sons earlier on by the British, where they were released and really essentially cornering him into trying to negotiate without any viable alternatives. Another play that was at force behind the scenes was negotiations with the nearby independent state of Hyderabad, which had been working. There was at the same time also concerns about a departure of Napoleon from Toulon that led to the British providing an additional 4,000 military reinforcements. And so this was part of a broader concern that the British had of this region, that it wasn't just targeted to a specific part, but it could impact all of the British presence within India. And so as a result of that, there was additional pressure that was put in terms of developing an alliance with a nearby ruler, which is the Nizam of Hyderabad, towards developing a new treaty. And so as a result of the British efforts in developing that treaty, the Nizam said that he would support an ultimatum against Tipu Sultan and war alongside the British company if it was necessary, which he did in fact do. There were specific amicable relations between Fort William and Fort St. George in the area. There's also concerns that any type of conspiracy that could come out of those areas could foil the plans that existed in Chennai. Arthur Wellesley was particularly uncertain and lacked confidence with his relationship with his brothers, but he still was able to be more adept at developing military preparations and steering his forces. He has been known to say that my idea, and this is to avoid disputes upon petty subjects, which have one effect only, and that is of erecting little men into great ones, to really try to contain any issues as they arise. Arthur Wellesley also really enjoyed the influence that he had amassed, but grew uncomfortable with his position that it had developed in the area or city known as Chennai. He also had a relationship with the governor general, was of mixed bags because he was his brother, but overall the benefits of having his brother in that position of power outweighed the liabilities. Arthur Wellesley was said to have worked very diligently and normally within the rules and with great expertise. He impressed everyone around him with his reliability and his attention to detail. His brother Henry will also serve as a sounding board and a sponge, absorbing frustration and hostility that occurred. And this relationship with the brothers between the Wellesley brothers allowed them to develop other negotiations and alliances because they had a high degree of trust amongst each other. Arthur Wellesley was also known for being very careful and tactical in the work that he was doing for special forces. And so he kept keen track of the weather as he was moving. He used this particular barometer to monitor the weather during his Iberian campaigns. He also kept track of geography, and he used this case to carry maps and other types of official documents in the Peninsular Wars from 1808 to 1814. This information I have obtained from different sources, including Maya Jasanoff's The Edge of Empire, John Severn's Architects of Empire, the Duke of Wellington and his brothers, The Iron Duke by Lawrence James, and Ben Macintyre's The Rogue Heroes, which looks more specifically at World War II, but also provides an account of British secret special forces that really worked to sabotage the Nazis and change the nature of war. And this was built off of lessons they learned during the rule of India. And the actual defeat of Tipu Sultan that happened in 1799 had to be captured and really build hype and propaganda to really support other British excursions in India. And so the death of Tipu Sultan was depicted in different artwork. Here you have his body being found by British soldiers, and this included in a color engraving. There's also oil paintings that are also showing the discovery of the body. And the actual sword that was captured of Tipu Sultan is also developed as well. This sword, which cost the officers 200 guineas, was a gold hilt embellished with diamonds and enamel work depicting the storming of Seringapatam. And it was also made of a gold mounted leather, really trying to show the sheer force as well as precision that was used. The sword was gifted by a descendant of Sir David Baird and was previously on display at the National War Museum since the 1930s. What's also interesting here is that David Baird had been previously a hostage of Tipu Sultan, where he had been held as a prisoner of war for about 4 years before he was released in a sort of exchange. Tipu Sultan's two sons were also held hostage by the British. They were not treated poorly. They were provided education and had also been taken care of well to try to encourage their father over time to perhaps relent to the British. The British did become nervous, though, that they couldn't wait for the sons to assume power and instead sought to remove Tipu Sultan from power. And the sword that you have here includes steel, gold, diamonds, enamel, and leather. The death place of Tipu Sultan is marked by a specific gravestone, and a mausoleum was set up to share his burial site. His actual homes that he included were at the top picture on the left side include his summer home, and on the bottom is his main palace. The actual regions that were included in the part of the British India included South Central India, and you can also see here Hyderabad, which is an area of concern, which had joined forces with the British, was independent until 1948, where it was assumed as a part of Indian government. The development of future demands also impacted how Arthur Wellesley was able to manage specific types of funding. He really worked to develop specific types of alliances, not only against around enemy lines, but also trying to take advantage of alliances that he could have with allies. Here's a photo of a reimagined meeting between Horatio Nelson and Arthur Wellesley. This meeting, which took place with Lord Nelson's specific approval that was put forward here, was important because he didn't consider the policies irresponsible or corrupt, but would not endorse them until he was satisfied. And so he also met with different folks as well if there was any problem with what was happening. He also sought out to make sure that that certain types of alliances had been met. He wanted to make sure that the Austrians also accepted any proposals that were put forward. He also joined in certain expeditions that were happening. He led to policies that led to a state of perpetuating warfare. At the same time, he also rejected company grants that would exchange for annuities over time. And so the two great forces of the British war against the revolutionary and Napoleonic forces met only once. And so this is an important meeting for them to have. Arthur Wellesley had only returned to Britain in 1805, but it also happened that his visit to London was sought to solicit new command and coincided with Nelson's brief return home. And so it's also important to note is that with Horatio Nelson, he had risen to fame in the 1790s. And at the time, the future Duke of Wellington, who was only then Sir Arthur Wellesley, was serving in India. So Wellesley only returned to Britain in 1805, but it also happened to be at a time that coincided with Nelson's visit. And so they had a brief time to meet during that period. So when Nelson went out again, he went out on a voyage that would culminate in his death at Trafalgar. Horatio Nelson and Arthur Wellesley only met once. That was only for a few minutes when they were waiting to speak with the Secretary of State. And much of the detail of what they had actually spoken about has been lost. What's important to also note is that the victories in the Peninsula and Waterloo brought equal fame to them. And actually, at the time, the significance of Wellesley's meeting with Nelson had not been apparent, but it was important to see that the two great men were able to meet at the same time was a source of inspiration for the artist. The original painting had been lost, and then this was a reimagined scene trying to build up the hype around it. So this is what I think is also important to show, is that this artwork that is being developed is really crucial as well for building up inspiration is also going forward. And so the original portrait that was put forward was probably based off of pre-existing portraits of them. And so there is a bit of superficialness to this picture, but Nelson didn't leave any indication of what he thought of Wellesley. But later in life, the Duke of Wellington did give an account of the meeting. He claimed that Nelson did not initially recognize him and spoke in a light and superficial manner before leaving the room for a moment. When Nelson returned, however, someone had told him exactly who Arthur Wellesley was, and more precisely. And so at that time, his entire attitude changed, so that the two Then two men then spoke as equals for the remainder of their brief conversation. It was also interesting to see that that Wellington was really on par at the time with his naval counterpart, and there appeared to be some sort of mutual admiration between the two, especially because of the interest in having this type of portrait by the public. Both of them were considered to be popular in the British imagination, and their depiction as heroes was already fixed at the time. And what you see here is during a depiction of the 1812 war, where British commander Arthur Wellesley is overseeing the removal of the French flag after his forces retook parts of Spain. What this also shows you is the different mechanisms that are built in for soft special operations forces funding, which require interagency collaboration as well as full collaboration. There's also the development of niche capabilities that are allowed for operational capabilities over time. And what really gave the British an advantage was that they kept 24-hour intelligence cycles, really having people on round the clock working on issues. And the sophisticated communications network, even without having high levels of technology at the times, and being able to transport information as it was captured, and also being able to convey it over long distances. The British also had really high-level systems for tracking battles. And so this became important over the long run in terms of how the British were developing theater logistics for overall sustainment, which played an important role in the Battle of Waterloo later on, that led to the defeat of Napoleon. What you can see here is from a later wars that Wellesley had in India, and this is the Maratha Wars, which is shortly after the Anglo-Mysore Wars. Here, Lord Wellesley's policies in India would be much like those of Napoleon Bonaparte in Europe. He never felt comfortable with his place in the political and social pecking order of Britain, and so he really sought out to consolidate the British position by extending a buffer zone around the Bengal presidency, which he'd already accomplished below with the Madras presidency. This particular thing that he did actually made the British presence stronger and much more permanent. He also worked with different smaller leaders in the area. He saw that the Peshwa and the Marathas had taken a more prominence because of the diminishing role of the monarchies, and this led to a problem of holding competing chiefdoms. So Arthur's brother Henry warned his other brother to the general public, European affairs were more important than Asian, and so they had to not only keep track of making sure that what they were doing was correct, but also being able to convey. And so this was an important other aspect of the special operations funding, is that they were able to get the information out there into the media so that they can continue to have funding. And so Henry stressed then that it's important for them to have information about the campaigns that they were working on to be printed within the Times of London. Arthur Wellesley was not really on constant display and changed the Calcutta Government House to be neoclassical 18th century style. And so these types of changes that were happening were important. Napoleon had also done the same thing in terms of being able to get information out about his campaigns in French newspapers. He would send out letters of his ship being out on the way to India, as well as his view of current events. Arthur ended up being sent to Spain in 1804, and he worked as an envoy to Spain extraordinary. And so Richard Wellesley also comes under attack and has to be defended. And the reason why this was important is that they have to manage all of their careers, because if one of them falls, then it impacts the others. And so when Arthur's brother Richard, his career came under attack in 1805, it would mean that if Richard's career collapsed, it would spell doom for all of them. So they all worked together to prevent that from happening. Here, what you will see happening is how the specific battle lines were drawn up in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 against the French. Here, the same way that that the Duke of Wellington had built up alliances in India against Tipu Sultan in Karnataka. The same had also been done with other European forces against the French. And so in this final defeat of Napoleon, it ended 23 years of recurrent warfare between France and other powers of Europe. It was fought across 3 miles south of the Waterloo village between Napoleon's forces and the combined forces of the Duke of Wellington's allied armies, which included his forces, the British, the Dutch, Belgian, and German units, and the Prussian army. And so as they are all developing these forces, Napoleon really engaged in a major blunder where he delayed his attack until midday to allow the ground to dry, giving Blucher's troops time to reach Waterloo and support Wellington. And so this tactical error really cost Napoleon the war. And this was the same thing that had been done during the Anglo-Mysore War, being able to take advantage of the timing of the year, as well as concerns about rain to make it go in the favor of the British. And so some of the historical lessons that can be gleaned from these forces are that special operations funding. There has to be flexibility to be able to react to emergency demands as they are occurring, and also time to build unforeseen equipment. So this is in terms of developing new rocket technologies, as well as being able to take booty and use it for payments towards troops, and expand wealth of the generals. It is also shown that deepening existing partnerships was also very critical for responding to transnational threats, and how the British had worked to develop alliances across India as well as across Europe to defeat their specific enemies. And there's also specific insights into considerations on the ground. What I saw also was important was how there's acquisition of special operations forces peculiar equipment, which includes material supplies and other types of services that could come into play later on. And so what you can see happening regarding this War of 1815 that is happening with the Battle of Waterloo, it shows that the British defensive lines, how they are being captured, and how there has been, really 9 hours of continuous fighting at the time. And so the nearest the French had come to capturing the chateau was when they determined an attack by one of the commanders, which is known as the Smasher, where he is wielding a huge axe, managed to break through the north gate. The commanding officer at the time, Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald, and his guardsmen managed to shut the gate, trapping 30 Frenchmen inside. They were all killed apart from a young drummer boy who had actually been spared. So showing, really the might and force of the British in this battle. Also worked to kind of expand the British military presence later on. Napoleon ended up fleeing the battlefield at this time, and this is showing his flight at the time to show that he is fleeing the battlefield. What's also important to see here in terms of operational resourcing issues is that Theater's Special Operations Command lacks the support to negotiate a labyrinth of funding sources and authorities and available equipment and services. This is important now, especially because those who are leading the command may not have access to resources and have to be able to kind of channel this broad array of resources. And so this is something that those generals who are more successful are able to do. And so in terms of current TSOC decision cycles that are often may have adverse impacts or impacted by length and also unclear budgetary purposes for funding joint operations. The TSOCs are also frequently required to seek funding from multiple sources to accomplish GCC-directed tasks. Military departments may not have sufficient resources for service common lines in their appropriations to support emergent TSOC operational deployments. And there's also specific operations process that may be considered too slow and complicated to allow for TSOC commanders to take advantage of the strategic and operational windows of opportunity. So as these specific issues are happening, it's kind of interesting to see how these issues that are on the plate now are also similar to what was happening back during the 1800s as well. What the casebook on Tucker and Lamb had pointed out is how specific theater logistics were shown. They provide the example of General Pacheas, who says that because of his clout, was to some degree able to maintain control of his logistics, but generally theater logistics command were in charge. This meant that special operations sustainment battalions had to sustain special operation forces in country, and no one else could do that. This took major innovation by SOF logistics to sustain not just US SOF, but also Allied SOF, and how all of these issues were happening together. And what can also be kind of taken away is that how future expansion methods are sought out, including how to incorporate financial planning elements into this to expand rehearsal of drill concept and synchronize with budget planning process, and to establish high-level dispute resolution to reduce frequency and duration of disputes and provide staff training and reference materials, as well as being able to coordinate with joint staff advocates. This also comes into play with hostage negotiation that was happening at the time. The picture on the left shows you two of Tipu Sultan's sons as they are being taken away, and how David Baird, who was a hostage, is the one who goes back, and it leads the charge to defeat Tipu Sultan. This also provides some of the possibilities of multilateralism and international cooperation that can happen at the times. The Brookings Institute reports that the gains of minimizing the negative or maximizing the positive spillover effects the actions of some countries have on others, as well as the possibility of showing the gains of the provision of global public good. So all of these are kind of takeaways that can come into play.